The grand marble hall of Harrington Manor gleamed under the morning sun, every surface polished to a mirror shine that reflected the kind of wealth most people only see in dreams. Amara, a 24-year-old black maid in a crisp gray uniform, moved through the space like a shadow, quiet, efficient, invisible. She had been working here for 8 months, long enough to memorize the rhythm of the house, the soft click of expensive shoes on tile, the distant chime of crystal, the way sunlight sliced across gold-framed portraits like spotlights on forgotten royalty. She was dusting the east wall when her cloth paused mid-swipe. High above the carved fireplace hung a massive portrait in an ornate golden frame. The woman inside it gazed out with calm, knowing eyes, deep brown skin, full lips curved in a gentle smile, hair pulled back in the neat bun Amara remembered from childhood photographs. The same small silver locket rested at her throat. The same faint scar above her left eyebrow from the time she slipped on ice carrying groceries home in the snow. Amara's hand dropped. The feather duster clattered to the floor. That's my mother," she whispered. The words barely audible over the sudden roaring in her ears. Maria Johnson. The woman who raised her alone in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Southside Chicago. The woman who worked double shifts at the diner and the laundromat, who sang gospel under her breath while ironing school uniforms, who never once complained about the bills or the cold or the men who never stayed. The woman who, on quiet nights, would stare at one faded photo she kept hidden in a shoebox under the bed, then quickly closed the lid as if the picture burned her fingers. Amara stepped closer until her nose was inches from the canvas. The brushstrokes were masterful, the lighting reverent. This wasn't some random staff portrait tucked in a hallway. This was center stage, the first thing anyone saw when they entered the main hall of one of the most powerful homes in the country. Her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her teeth. Why is my mom's picture hanging in a white billionaire's mansion? Footsteps echoed behind her. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of custom leather soles on marble. Edward Harrington III appeared in the arched doorway, still in his charcoal suit from an early meeting, silver hair perfectly combed, face tanned from weekends on the yacht. He stopped short when he saw Amara standing frozen beneath the portrait. His pale blue eyes flicked from her face to the painting and back again. Every line of his body went rigid. "You're Maria's girl?" he said. The words came out hoarse, like they had been locked in his throat for decades. Amara spun around, tears already stinging. "How do you know my mother's name? Why is she here, on your wall, like she belongs in this house?" Harrington didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the portrait, each step measured, as if approaching something sacred and dangerous at the same time. When he reached her side, he lifted a trembling hand and touched the lower edge of the frame. Gently, almost reverently. "Because she saved my son's life," he said quietly, "and because 25 years ago I let them throw her away like she was nothing." Amara's breath caught. The hallway suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "My mother never told me she ever set foot in a place like this. Not once. She didn't want you to carry the weight," Harrington replied. His voice cracked on the last word. "She was protecting you, from me, from this house, from what I did." He turned to face her fully. For the first time, Amara saw something raw beneath the polished exterior. Regret so deep it had carved permanent lines around his eyes. "Sit down, Amara," he said. "You deserve to hear every second of it. Starting from the night your mother ran into a burning wing of this mansion to pull my 4-year-old boy out of smoke and falling beams while the rest of us stood frozen like cowards." Amara didn't sit. She couldn't move. All she could do was stare at the portrait of the woman who had given her everything, and apparently hidden an entire lifetime of courage and pain behind a tired smile and a locked shoebox. The billionaire's voice dropped lower. 3 days later, they accused her of stealing a diamond necklace worth more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes. She denied it, calm, steady, the way she always was. But fear of scandal moves faster than truth in houses like this. They sent her away that same night. No severance, no apology, just gone. He looked back at Maria's painted face. Years later, we found the necklace hidden in a storage room. She was innocent, always had been. I had her portrait commissioned and hung right here so I would never forget the cost of my silence. Amara's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of a side table. Tears spilled freely now. All those years, she carried that alone, so I wouldn't hate the world that hurt her. Harrington nodded slowly. Your mother was the bravest person who ever walked through these doors. And today, standing in front of me, is proof she never stopped being extraordinary. The hall fell silent, except for the faint tick of an antique clock. Amara lifted her eyes to the portrait one last time. Maria's gaze seemed to meet hers. Steady, loving, unbreakable. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open with a soft, expensive creak. Edward Harrington III stepped through, still carrying the faint scent of his morning espresso and the crisp lines of a charcoal suit that cost more than Amara's rent for 6 months. He was mid-sentence into a phone call. Something about quarterly projections. When his gaze lifted and landed on the young black maid, standing rigid beneath the portrait, the phone slipped from his fingers. It clattered against the marble, screen cracking like thin ice. Amara didn't turn at first. She couldn't. Her eyes were still locked on her mother's painted face, those familiar brown eyes that had once looked at her over bowls of instant noodles and whispered bedtime prayers. But the sudden silence in the room felt heavier than any sound. Harrington's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. His pale skin went almost gray. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came, only a sharp, involuntary inhale, the kind people make when they've been punched in the diaphragm. He took one step forward, then another, slower now, as if the floor might crack beneath him. When he was close enough that Amara could see the tremor in his manicured hands, he finally spoke. "You're Maria's daughter." The words landed like stones in still water. Amara spun around so fast her uniform skirt flared. Tears she hadn't realized were building spilled over instantly. "How do you know that?" Her voice cracked, raw. "How do you know my mother's name?" Harrington didn't answer right away. His eyes darted back to the portrait. Maria's gentle smile, the silver locket at her throat, the quiet strength in her posture. And something broke behind his carefully maintained composure. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction, but enough to make the powerful man look suddenly smaller. "Because I see her in you," he said quietly. "The same eyes, the same way you stand. Like the world can throw anything at you and you'll still keep going." Amara's chest heaved. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, angry at the tears, angrier that they wouldn't stop. "My mother cleaned houses, raised me alone, never once mentioned working in a place like this. Never mentioned you. So why?" Her finger jabbed toward the painting. "Why is she hanging here like she's royalty? Like she belongs in your world?" Harrington exhaled slowly, the sound ragged. He reached out as if to touch the frame again, then thought better of it and let his hand fall. "She didn't just work here, Amara. She was unforgettable. The moment she walked through those doors 25 years ago, everyone knew it. Not because she tried to impress anyone. She never did. She simply was. Honest. Fearless. When a supervisor tried to dock pay from a teenage kitchen boy for a broken plate he didn't break, Maria stepped in front of 50 people and said, "You will not punish a child for your mistake." No shouting, just calm steel. That boy still talks about her. Half the staff from back then still do. Amara's throat tightened. She had never heard any of this. Not a single story. Her mother had always changed the subject when old jobs came up, always with the same tired smile. "Past is past, baby. We got today." Harrington's voice dropped lower. She became more than staff to this house. She became the conscience we didn't deserve. And then, I let them take that away from her. He looked at Amara again, really looked, searching her face as though trying to find forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. I was there the night they accused her. I stood in this very hall while they searched her locker, while they called her a thief over a necklace that wasn't even gone. I could have stopped it. One word from me and it would have ended. But I stayed silent. Scandal was coming. Reputations were at stake, and I chose the easy path. His eyes glistened now, actual tears, not the performative kind rich men sometimes fake for cameras. 3 days earlier, she had run into fire to save my son, 4 years old, trapped on the 3rd floor while smoke poured up the stairs. Everyone else panicked. I froze. Maria didn't. She carried him out through broken glass and falling beams. My boy is alive today because of her. And 3 days later, I let them call her a criminal and send her away with nothing. Amara pressed a hand to her mouth to stop the sob. The hallway blurred. Harrington stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "When we found the necklace years later, hidden by someone else, I had this portrait painted. Hung it right here so every morning I have to walk past her face and remember what my cowardice cost. I looked for her, Amara, for years. I wanted to apologize. To make it right, she was gone, vanished. Protecting you from all of this, I suppose." Amara stared at him, then back at her mother's portrait. Maria's eyes seemed to soften, as though she were saying, "It's okay, baby. Let it out." "She never told me," Amara whispered. "She carried it all, so I wouldn't have to hate." Harrington nodded once, slow and heavy. "Your mother was the strongest person I've ever known. And you," he swallowed, "you're standing here now, asking the questions she never got to ask. That means something." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked on. Indifferent. Amara wiped her eyes again. She didn't know if she wanted to scream, cry, or walk out forever. But she knew one thing. The woman in that frame had never been invisible. Not here. Not to him. And maybe not to her, either. The storm hit Harrington Manor like a fist from the sky. Lightning cracked the night open, and thunder rolled so deep it rattled the crystal chandeliers. Rain hammered the slate roof in sheets, drowning out every other sound until the first alarm shrieked fire. A bolt had struck the east wing's old turret. Flames licked up the wooden beams behind the 3rd floor nursery wall. Smoke poured thick and black through the hallways, curling under doors like dark fingers. Servants screamed. Someone shouted for water buckets. Someone else ran for the phones. Panic spread faster than the fire itself. Edward Harrington III stood frozen in the grand foyer, pajama-clad, barefoot, staring up at the staircase as if willing his legs to move. His 4-year-old son, little Teddy, his only child, his heir, was asleep in that nursery. The boy who carried the Harrington name into the next generation. And Edward couldn't make himself climb the stairs. The staff milled around him, maids clutching their aprons, the butler barking useless orders, the cook weeping into her hands. No one moved toward the flames. Fear held them like chains. Then Maria appeared. She had been in the kitchen, finishing the late-night cleanup after a dinner party that had ended hours earlier. Her uniform was still spotless, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair tied back in a simple knot. She heard the first crack of the alarm, saw the smoke rolling down the service stairs, and didn't hesitate. She pushed past the frozen cluster of servants, grabbed a wet dish towel from the sink, pressed it over her mouth and nose, and ran up the back staircase, through the choking corridor, past rooms where paintings already blistered from heat. The air burned her lungs even through the cloth. Sparks rained from the ceiling like angry stars. A beam groaned overhead and snapped, crashing down in a shower of embers. Maria ducked, rolled, kept moving. She reached the nursery door. It was hot to the touch. She kicked it open. Inside, Teddy was awake, sitting up in his crib, coughing, tiny fists rubbing his eyes. The smoke was already thick enough to sting. Flames crawled along the far wall, eating the curtains. "Shh, baby, I got you," Maria whispered, voice steady even as her eyes watered. She scooped him up in one arm, wrapped the wet towel around his face like a hood, and held him tight against her chest. The hallway back was worse now. Heat pressed in from every side. A section of ceiling collapsed behind her with a deafening roar. She didn't look back. She ran. Smoke blinded her. Her lungs screamed. Her legs burned. But she kept Teddy's head tucked under her chin, murmuring soft gospel words she used to sing to Amara when she was small. "Hold on, just a little while longer." She burst through the service door onto the second-floor landing. Servants finally surged forward. Someone took Teddy from her arms. Someone else grabbed her elbow to steady her as she coughed violently, black soot streaking her face. Edward was there now, pushing through the crowd. His face was ashen. He reached for his son, then froze when he saw Maria, cuffing, swaying, but standing tall. "You?" He started, voice breaking. "You brought him out." Maria wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "He's safe, sir. That's all that matters." She turned away before he could say more, disappearing down the back stairs toward the staff quarters. No fuss. No demand for thanks. Just gone. Later, when the fire was out and the wings smoldered under floodlights, the household gathered in the foyer. Teddy clung to his father's neck, safe. The staff whispered Maria's name like a prayer. Edward stood apart, staring at the staircase she had climbed. He knew then that something had shifted inside his house. A woman who had risked everything for a child not her own had just reminded every person in that mansion what real courage looked like. And 3 days later, when the diamond necklace vanished and suspicion fell on the only person who had ever dared to be fearless in that house, Edward Harrington would remember that night and choose silence anyway. But on this night, as rain still pounded the roof, Maria Johnson had carried the future of the Harrington family through hell and brought it back alive. She never asked for a medal. She never told her own daughter the story. She simply went back to work the next morning, humming the same quiet hymn, as if saving a life was just another task on her list. The fire had barely been extinguished when the next storm arrived, not from the sky, but from within the walls of Harrington Manor. 3 days after Maria carried little Teddy through smoke and flames, the household still buzzed with whispered gratitude. Servants nodded to her in the corridors. The cook slipped extra portions onto her plate. Even the stern housekeeper softened her tone. Maria accepted it all quietly, with the same calm dignity she always carried. She returned to her duties, polishing silver, folding linens, scrubbing floors, as if the night she risked her life had been just another shift. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning, the vault alarm sounded. The family diamond necklace, 3 strands of flawless white diamonds set in platinum, an heirloom passed down 4 generations, was gone. The vault door stood ajar, the velvet-lined case empty. Panic erupted like the fire all over again. Edward Harrington III summoned everyone to the grand hall. Security guards flanked the doors. Relatives gathered in silk robes, faces tight with suspicion. Servants lined up along the walls, hands clasped, eyes down. Mariah stood among them, uniform still dusted with faint soot from the fire cleanup, posture straight. Edward's voice cut through the murmurs. This cannot stand. The necklace is worth millions. Whoever took it will face consequences. Eyes darted. Whispers spread. Who had access? Who was new? Who had motive? The butler cleared his throat. Sir, the vault is only accessible to family and senior staff. But Maria was in the East Wing that night, alone after the fire. A cousin, a sharp-featured woman in pearls, snapped her head up. She was the last one near the family quarters, and she's always so quiet. Too quiet. Maria lifted her gaze slowly. I did not take anything, sir. I've never stolen in my life. Her voice was even, unhurried, no pleading. Just fact. Edward hesitated. His face flickered. Something like memory of the fire crossing his features, then hardened. Scandal loomed larger than gratitude. The press would feast on a theft in the Harrington home. Reputations would shatter. Search her quarters, he ordered quietly. Guards moved. Maria didn't resist. She walked ahead of them to the small staff room she shared with two others, unlocked her locker with steady hands. They rifled through her few belongings. A worn Bible, a pair of sensible shoes, a shoebox with old photos, a spare uniform. Nothing. But suspicion had already taken root. The cousin pressed forward. She could have hidden it elsewhere, or sold it already. Edward looked away. His son Teddy clung to a nanny's leg nearby, watching wide-eyed. Maria turned to him. I swear on my daughter's life, Mr. Harrington. I did not take your necklace. For a heartbeat, the hall went still. Edward met her eyes, those same steady eyes that had carried his child to safety, and something cracked inside him, but fear won. Maria Johnson, he said, voice low. You're dismissed, effective immediately. Leave the premises. No references. Gasps rippled through the staff. Maria's face remained composed, but her hands tightened at her sides. She nodded once. As you wish, sir. No tears. No outburst. She gathered her few things in silence, folded them into a small cloth bag, and walked toward the service door. Servants stepped aside, some with downcast eyes, others avoiding her gaze entirely. As she reached the threshold, Edward spoke again, barely audible. Maria. She paused but didn't turn. Yes, sir? He swallowed. I'm sorry. The words hung there, thin and useless. Maria straightened her shoulders. You'll find the truth one day. Until then, take care of that boy. She stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The heavy door closed behind her with a final click. Inside, the hall felt emptier than before. Edward stared at the spot where she had stood, the weight of his silence pressing harder than any flame. That night, Maria boarded a bus back to Chicago with nothing but her dignity and the memory of a child she had saved. She never spoke of the mansion again. Not to friends, not to her young daughter Amara. She simply worked harder, loved fiercer, and buried the humiliation so deep it never touched her child. Years would pass before the necklace resurfaced. Hidden by a distant relative desperate for gambling money, and the truth would finally surface. But on that humiliating evening, as rain began to fall on the long driveway, Maria walked away from Harrington Manor unbroken. She had given them her courage. They had given her nothing in return, yet she carried on, because some strengths no one can steal. Years passed like shadows lengthening across the marble floors of Harrington Manor. The East Wing had been rebuilt. The nursery repainted in soft blues for future grandchildren who never came. Life moved forward in polished routine. Dinners with crystal glasses, board meetings in oak-paneled rooms, Teddy growing into a quiet young man who rarely spoke of the night a maid carried him from flames. Edward Harrington III, aged in silence. The lines around his eyes deepened not from laughter, but from nights staring at the empty spot where the diamond necklace once lay in its velvet case. He never replaced it. The vault remained locked, a reminder he couldn't bear to open. Then came the renovation. In the spring of 2025, contractors gutted the unused storage rooms in the basement. Forgotten spaces filled with dust-covered trunks, broken furniture, and crates labeled in faded ink. One worker pried open a warped cabinet door behind a stack of old portraits. Something metallic glinted in the beam of his flashlight. He called Edward down immediately. There, tucked inside a plain wooden jewelry box, half buried under yellowed linens, lay the necklace, untouched. Diamonds catching the light as if no time had passed. A small note slipped beneath it, scrawled in the shaky hand of Edward's late cousin, Victor, who had died of a heart attack years earlier. For the debt, forgive me. Edward stood motionless in the dim basement, the necklace cradled in his palm like a live thing. The truth hit him harder than any fire ever could. Maria had been innocent. Always. The accusation, the dismissal, the humiliation. He had allowed it all. Fear of scandal had silenced him then, and pride had kept him silent since. Guilt crushed his chest until he could barely breathe. He sank onto a dusty crate, head in hands, the necklace cold against his skin. That same afternoon, he summoned the family portrait painter, the same artist who had captured Teddy as a boy. "Paint her," Edward said, voice rough. "Maria Johnson, exactly as she was, strong, unbreakable. Hang it in the main hall, where I pass it every morning." The portrait took weeks. The artist worked from old staff photos Edward had kept hidden in a drawer. Maria in her uniform, chin lifted, eyes steady. When it was finished, Edward supervised its placement himself. Center wall, golden frame, spotlighted so no one could miss it. He stood beneath it the first morning it hung, staring up at her painted face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words echoed off marble, unanswered. He hired private investigators, discreet at first, then desperate. They traced her to Chicago, then a small town in Georgia, then nothing. Maria had vanished like smoke. Changed her name, perhaps, or simply chosen to disappear from the world that had betrayed her. Letters sent to old addresses came back unopened. Phone numbers disconnected. No trace of her daughter, either. Edward searched for nearly a decade. Every lead ended in emptiness. He grew older, quieter, haunted. Teddy asked once why the portrait stayed when so many others had been replaced. Edward only said, "Because I owe her that much." The necklace was returned to the vault, locked away again. But the portrait remained, Maria's calm gaze watching over the hall, a daily accusation Edward welcomed. It reminded him that silence could destroy as surely as fire. That one decision, to stay quiet when he should have spoken, had cost an innocent woman her livelihood, her honor, and perhaps her peace. He never found her to say the words aloud, never got to kneel and offer the apology that burned in his throat every morning. But the portrait was his confession, hung where the world could see. Here lived a woman of unmatched courage, wronged by fear and pride, and never forgotten. In quiet moments, Edward would stand before it, fingers tracing the frame, murmuring the same useless phrase. "I looked for you. I swear I did." The mansion carried on, elegant, empty, echoing with what might have been. Maria's innocence had been proven, but the damage remained irreversible. And Edward Harrington lived with that truth every single day. Beneath the watchful eyes of the woman he had failed. The grand hall of Harrington Manor felt smaller now, the high ceilings pressing down like the weight of 25 years. Afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, catching dust motes in slow golden spirals and illuminating Maria's portrait on the wall. Amara stood beneath it, arms wrapped around herself, still in her gray maid's uniform. Edward Harrington III faced her, no longer the untouchable billionaire, but an old man carrying a lifetime of regret on his shoulders. He cleared his throat once, twice, as if the words had rusted inside him. "I owe you the full truth, Amara," he began, voice low and unsteady. "And I owe your mother more than I can ever repay." Amara lifted her chin, eyes red-rimmed but steady, Maria's eyes. "Then say it. All of it." Edward nodded. He walked to the portrait and rested his palm flat against the lower frame, as though drawing strength from the painted face. 25 years ago, your mother saved my son, my only heir, from a fire that could have ended our family line. She ran into smoke and falling beams when the rest of us froze. Teddy is alive, married now, with children of his own, because Maria carried him out. 3 days later, the necklace disappeared. Panic took over. My relatives pointed fingers. I let them. I stood silent while they accused her, searched her things, humiliated her in front of everyone. I could have stopped it with one word. I didn't. Fear of scandal, of what the newspapers would say, won. They sent her away that night. No apology, no severance, just gone. He paused, swallowing hard. Years later, we found the necklace hidden by my cousin Victor. Maria was innocent, always had been. The guilt, it never left me. I had this portrait painted so I would see her face every day and remember what my cowardice cost. I searched for her, for both of you, for years. Private investigators, old contacts, every lead. Nothing. She disappeared so completely it felt like punishment. Amara's breath hitched. Tears slipped down her cheeks again. But she didn't wipe them away this time. Edward turned fully to her. "I failed her, Amara. I failed the bravest woman I've ever known. And I failed you by letting her walk out of here carrying that pain alone. But today," his voice cracked, "today I stand here looking at her daughter, and I see Maria's strength in every line of your face. You deserve to know she was never forgotten. Not by me, not by this house." He took a slow breath. "I'm going to make this right. Publicly. I'll release a statement tomorrow. Full details. The fire, the false accusation, the discovery of the necklace, her innocence. I'll name her. Maria Johnson. The woman who saved the Harrington heir and was repaid with betrayal. I'll fund a scholarship in her name if you'll allow it. Anything to restore her honor. The world will finally know who she really was." Amara stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked up at the portrait. Maria's painted gaze seemed softer now, almost peaceful. "She never told me any of this," Amara whispered. "Not one word. All those years raising me alone, working doubles, smiling through everything. She was protecting me, keeping the bitterness away so I wouldn't grow up hating rich people, or white people, or the world that hurt her. She carried it all so I could have something clean, something hopeful." Edward's eyes glistened. She was extraordinary. Quiet strength like that, it's rarer than any diamond. Amara stepped closer to the portrait. She reached up and touched the frame gently, the way Edward had so many times before. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can see what she saw in people, even in you. She believed in second chances. She believed people could change." She turned back to him. "Do what you promised. Let the world know her name. Let her courage live out loud. That's what she would have wanted. Not revenge, but truth." Edward nodded, throat tight. "It will be done." The hall fell quiet again. Only the faint tick of the grandfather clock marking time. Amara looked at her mother's face one last time. A face that had hidden pain behind love, sacrifice behind smiles. Justice had arrived 25 years late, delayed by fear and pride. But it had arrived powerful enough to shift something deep inside the mansion's walls. Amara straightened her shoulders. She was no longer just a maid in this house. She was Maria's daughter, carrying the same unbreakable spirit. And, somewhere, In the quiet spaces her mother had chosen, Maria's courage was finally honored forever.